Is censorship getting worse? I've noticed this trend on social media recently where there are replacement terms for words that would otherwise be censored. This is primarily due to TikTok's regulation, which in turn spills onto all the other social media platforms because creators are posting the same thing everywhere. Here are a few of the replacement terms that people have been using. It's stuff you've probably seen before, like unalive or segs or corn. Now, I was under the impression that censorship in media had declined in the past 2 decades. I remember watching sitcoms where bad words were merely insinuated and any sex-related stuff was alluded to but never really shown outright, except for like HBO being the notable exception. There were even jokes about how rampant violence was in American media, but God forbid you used an expletive. For the longest time, the internet seemed like the Wild West, where anything went and there weren't really many guardrails. And personally, I think that's what a lot of us liked about the internet. But whether it's modern social media, the era of cable television, or the early days of cinema, censorship has always been present. And so to better understand where we are today, let's see how censorship affected each of these time periods, starting in 1915. To paint a picture, the US was riding the wave of the Second Industrial Revolution, cities were booming, the automobile was transforming transportation, and a new form of entertainment was exploding in popularity: motion pictures. Nickelodeons and silent films were drawing huge audiences, and the industry was growing rapidly. Perhaps even too rapidly. That year, there was a landmark decision by the US Supreme Court, which ruled that motion pictures were not protected by free speech. This was part of a suit between Mutual Film Corporation and the Industrial Commission of Ohio. What happened essentially was, in 1913, 2 years prior, Ohio had created a board of censors to review and approve every film shown in the state. Mutual Film Corporation, a film production company popular for some of Charlie Chaplin's work, challenged this and argued that it violated their free speech and interfered with interstate commerce, which the Constitution's Dormant Commerce Clause prohibits states from doing. However, the Supreme Court voted unanimously that motion pictures did not merit First Amendment protection because, quote, "It cannot be put out of view that the exhibition of moving pictures is a business, pure and simple, not to be regarded as part of the press of the country or as organs of public opinion. They are mere representations of events, but, as we have said, capable of evil, the greater because of their attractiveness and manner of exhibition." That's a direct quote from Justice Joseph McKenna. That's kind of scary, right? But at the same time, we have to contextualize. This was brand new technology, and it was spreading very fast. I mean, think of how AI is discussed today. There's people left and right with varying opinions discussing copyright infringement, workplace protection, government intervention, and many other things. At the time, this was crazy new technology, and who knew how it would affect the spread of ideas? So the government censored it. While that whole thing was going on in Ohio, Hollywood was having its own struggles. In the 1920s, Hollywood was plagued by scandals, such as the death of William Desmond Taylor and the murder of Virginia Rapp. Hollywood kind of had this reputation for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which was highly condemned at the time. To put this into perspective, legislators from 37 different states introduced nearly 100 film censorship bills between 1921 and 1923. Now, censorship bills are bad for business. And the problem that studios were facing was that the reason behind the censorship kind of seemed to be a moving target. Decency laws were inconsistent from state to state, and so the movie industry was suffering. So Hollywood enlists the help of William H. Hayes, Postmaster General under President Warren G. Harding, and former head of the Republican National Committee to rehabilitate Hollywood's image. And so Will Hayes became the president of the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America in 1922, the MPPDA, which later became the Motion Picture Association that we know today. The MPPDA opted to self-regulate in order to have more control over the output, no more being at the whims of the decency laws from state to state. This originally started as a list of don'ts and be carefuls that looked somewhat like this. No use of profanity or suggestive nudity, no illegal traffic of drugs, no inference to sex perversion, which was essentially code for homosexuality, no white slavery, which was essentially code for prostitution, etc. This was colloquially referred to as the MPPDA's Magna Charta in 1927. Yes, I'm saying Magna Charta with an H, Charta, because that's how it was spelled, and I'm not really sure how people used to pronounce that back in 1927. Eventually, this evolved into the Motion Picture Production Code, or more popularly known as the Hays Code, in 1934. While the Magna Charta was a set of loose guidelines, the Hays Code became a formalized censorship code for all Hollywood films. It required studios to get a seal of approval, otherwise the theaters wouldn't screen the films. I'll put a link to the 1930s text in the description below, but the gist of it has language such as, "No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standard of those who see it. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation." And then it'll go on to specify things such as Murder must be presented in a way that will not inspire imitation. Theft, robbery, safecracking, etc. should not be detailed in method. Illegal drug traffic must never be presented. Segs and grape should never be more than suggested. White slavery shall not be treated. Miscegenation, sex relationships between white and black races, is forbidden. And a lot more. It's a 4-page document, and I actually really recommend going through it because it's fascinating. And this whole censorship doctrine resulted in some funny moments, such as the thunderous silence of Frankenstein. You see, Frankenstein was originally released in 1931, and in the original cut, Dr. Frankenstein exclaims,
"Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!"
But using the Lord's name in vain was not allowed as part of the code, so for the re-release, they did this.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Another example is the famous Notorious scene. So the Hays Code specifies that excessive and lustful kissing is not to be shown. And according to Hollywood lore, this translates to no more than 3 seconds per kiss. And so directors like Alfred Hitchcock circumvented this by making sure that each kiss was less than 3 seconds, even though the entire embrace lasts 2.5 minutes. But despite some funny moments here and there and directors trying to find workarounds, the Hays Code was a success. Once the code was enforced, battles with states and city censors plummeted, studios no longer had to create multiple edited versions of the same film for different states, and nationwide releases became faster and cheaper. The result was a more stable and profitable movie industry, and this lasted for about 30 years, until 1968. By the mid-60s, culture was changing fast. The US was having the civil rights movement, there was also the sexual revolution worldwide, anti-war protests, and just general improved communication due to the rise of television. Oh, and by the way, in 1952, the Supreme Court overturned their original ruling of the mutual film thing, so now motion pictures were to be protected by free speech. There were also some changes at the MPPDA. William Hays retired in 1945 and was replaced by Eric Johnston, who was more of a diplomat than a strict moral enforcer, focused on improving the movie industry's public image after World War II. The MPPDA also changed their name to the Motion Picture Association of America. They eventually changed their name to just the Motion Picture Association, but that doesn't happen until way later in 2019. And by the time Jack Valenti became president of the MPAA in 1966, the Hays Code was severely outdated and unenforced. With this in mind, the MPAA decides to shift strategies, get rid of the old Hays Code, and unveil the modern film rating system, which is pretty much what we still have today. At the time, it was limited to G, general audiences, M, mature audiences, parental discretion advised, R, restricted, persons under 16 not admitted unless accompanied by a parent or adult guardian, and X, persons under 16 not admitted. And as time went on, it all got adjusted to what we have today. The M got replaced with PG, because let's be honest, M for mature audiences, parental discretion advised, is super confusing. PG-13 was eventually added to have a bit more of a gradient, and X was replaced with NC-17 because X-rated got pretty much entirely co-opted by the adult film industry. These days, you don't have to get your film rated, but it makes it much harder to get a theatrical release, and most theaters won't accept unrated or NC-17 films. It's important to note, though, that this rating system was strictly for movies. Television was still governed by much stricter regulations. Movies and television fall into different buckets because movies are considered a private good, distributed through theaters, physical media, and streaming services, which are all privately purchased. Television and radio, on the other hand, make use of public airwaves, which are licensed by the government and paid through advertisers, so it falls under the authority of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And this is true until today, by the way. The FCC enforces no obscene material at any time and limits on indecent or profane content during safe harbor, which is between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So there's a few parts of this now, because we're arriving at modern day. While the FCC regulates public airwaves channels such as ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., cable channels like MTV, Comedy Central, FX, and HBO were not regulated by the FCC. Many of them had internal policies as to what they would and wouldn't allow, but most importantly, a lot of them depended on advertisement revenue. The reason why HBO became known as the adult network with explicit content like The Sopranos, Sex and the City, and Game of Thrones was because they didn't depend on advertisement. But they did charge a premium for that service. Nowadays, we're seeing the exact same thing happen with social media. Most of these platforms depend entirely on advertisement, with a notable exception being YouTube Premium. Now look, I know that YouTube still depends primarily on ads, but that YouTube Premium is interesting because they're going for that subscription service. And YouTube has loosened up their content moderation policies. Like, for example, profanity is now allowed within the first 7 seconds of a video, whereas historically that would have resulted in immediate demonetization. Or another example is that moderators have been instructed to keep content online if it's deemed in the public interest, even if parts of it technically violate their policy. This internal guideline changed the policy to 50% violation from the previous 25% violation. According to YouTube's head of monetization policy, Connor Kavanaugh, this is because advertisers can better target content based on profanity levels, so the old buffer window is no longer necessary. I do want to mention that I'm aware that there's also Meta Verified and X Verified, which are paid services, though I'm not sure those qualify, because to me, they're more on the creator side than on the audience side, so I don't think they would influence as much, but I could be wrong. I'm open to hearing your thoughts on this. Ultimately, whether it was 1915, 2025, or whenever you're watching this, censorship really comes down to the same thing: money. And what we're seeing with content creators today is similar to what was happening with the Hays Code in 1934, self-censorship. You see, content creators are both the studios and the directors, so when they choose to use terminology like segs and corn, they're simply self-censoring while simultaneously using workarounds to make the content they want to make. Now, TikTok in particular is an interesting topic because it's owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company subject to Chinese laws which require government cooperation. So TikTok's censorship isn't entirely advertiser-driven. There is also a component of government censorship, which several studies have reinforced, in particular as it relates to policy alignment with the Chinese Communist Party. But because short-form content has become so widespread and content creators are publishing the same thing across multiple platforms, TikTok's censorship is starting to bleed into other social medias, like Instagram and YouTube. Why would you choose to say a certain word if you know that one of the most popular social media platforms is going to shut you down when you can just self-censor and then make sure that it gets published across all platforms? Now, YouTube and Instagram's guidelines don't censor you the same way that TikTok does. TikTok will straight up just halt the visibility of your content. And that has happened to me before with a video I made about how the Star Wars sound effects were made. I showed this clip of Han Solo shooting a blaster and it fell under sensitive content and it's still hidden to date. YouTube and Instagram are more likely to enforce age restrictions or demonetization, and I think that makes a huge difference. With all this history and information, I'd like to go back and tackle the question that I originally started this video with. Is censorship getting worse? With the influence of TikTok, the cancellation of Colbert's show, and the World Press Freedom Index officially marking the global media environment as difficult for the very first time in 2025, it's not crazy to think that. And as we've seen historically, the dependence on advertisement revenue does skew towards more censorship. And we're seeing streaming platforms such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and even HBO introduce an advertisement tier as part of their subscription plans. So is censorship getting worse? In some ways, yeah. But this is not unexpected. The strategy that worked in the past continues to be the strategy that works today, which is privatized funding that gives studios, platforms, and creators more freedom to take risks. When movies are financed outside of advertiser demands, when subscription services like HBO don't depend entirely on ad sales, and when independent journalism is funded directly by its audience, there's more room for unfiltered work. As more of our media shifts towards ad-supported models, the fight for uncensored storytelling isn't about finding new platforms, it's about protecting the business models that allow them to stay independent in the first place. Thanks so much for watching. I know this was a bit of a departure from the type of content I usually make. It tends to be a little more lighthearted and fun. But, just scrolling social media, I've seen all these replacement terms and it got me thinking as to where all the censorship came from and whether it's actually getting worse. So I hope you appreciated my deep dive. If you're looking for a lighter video, last month I released why magenta doesn't actually exist, so I'll leave it linked somewhere around here. And I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.